With the opening of Super Nintendo World and a number of Universal theme parks across the globe, including soon to be Orlando, alongside the brand new theme park Epic Universe in 2025, the question on everyone's mind is, where does Universal go from here? Given the popularity and success of Super Nintendo World at both Universal Studios Japan and Universal Studios Hollywood, we already know that this concept has been a massive home run. So you'd have to imagine that Universal is going to at the very least consider adding more video game properties to their parks in the coming years. But I can, without a doubt, 100% lock it in, guarantee that they will be adding more video game properties to their parks in the future. How can I guarantee this? Well, Universal has had a deal with Nintendo to make theme park attractions and lands and shops and restaurants ever since 2015, and it wasn't until just a few years ago that we actually started to see some lands start to open up based on the Nintendo properties. But here's the thing, despite what the name might imply, Super Nintendo World is just based on Mario. It's not encompassing of all the great brands and properties that Nintendo has to offer. So without a doubt, at the very least, at the bare minimum, Universal is going to go back to Nintendo, look through their catalog of titles, and pick out a number of them that they want to bring to the parks. But which one of these Nintendo properties could actually feasibly come to the parks? Well, you can't start talking about Nintendo without first talking about Pokémon. Touted by many as the highest grossing media property of all time, it is practically screaming to be turned into a theme park land. The possibilities for rides are endless. I mean, think about a Pokemon Snap ride, a Pokemon Stadium ride, a Pokemon Go ride. Not to mention that there are plenty of locations to pick from in the Pokemon universe that you could theme your land after. But really, most important for Universal is the fact that Pokemon has proven to be a lucrative franchise. This is something that's going to move merchandise, it's going to sell park tickets, and be extremely popular with the general public. And let's be honest, folks, Universal already has to be working on something for this, right? I mean, they know what we know, how popular Pokemon is, how much money it could make them. Surely they already have something they're working on, and honestly, I would eye one of Epic Universe's expansion plots for Pokemon Land to come in the future. I think there's an understanding at Universal that Pokemon has a chance to be the next big theme park property, the next Harry Potter of the Universal parks. So if they're going to do Pokemon, they're going to do it right, and they're going to give it the space that it needs, and they're going to build it on top of a blank canvas so they can do it as good as possible. Building it at Universal Studios Florida or Islands of Adventure, though possible, would require a lot more hoops to be jumped through, a lot more restrictions, and ultimately, I don't necessarily think with a property like this that they're likely to take that route. But of course, we kind of assumed that Pokemon was going to be inevitably coming to Universal, right? What else from Nintendo could come from the parks? Well, believe it or not, the one thing that's actually been rumored more than Pokemon has been The Legend of Zelda. There have been rumors about this thing replacing the Lost Continent ever since Nintendo signed on with Universal. Many have argued that given the theme of the Lost Continent, that very little aesthetic changes could be made to adjust it to become Zelda. And I mean, in a sense, this move makes sense. I mean, the Legend of Zelda video games have been extremely popular, especially the last two, Breath of the Wild and Tears of the Kingdom. Those two have really introduced Zelda to a whole new audience. But my one concern with the Legend of Zelda is that it's not too popular outside of the games. When you think about Mario or Pokemon, these are properties that people know and love outside of the video games themselves. Zelda hasn't really gotten a true test in that, so if you build a theme park land around it, you're running the risk of that property not being as popular as you might have hoped it would have been, and many of the gift shops and restaurants in the area just aren't as successful or as popular as, building one of these other video game properties would ultimately be. So here's the thing, it's heavily rumored. It seems like it could be very possible as a result of that, but I do have my apprehensions around the property simply because I'm just not sure how much it's necessarily going to connect with general audiences who aren't super familiar with the games. And here's the thing, what is Zelda's theme, right? It's not super unique to itself, right? You think about Mario, that's its own thing. Think about Pokemon, that's its own thing. Zelda, it's very similar and very reminiscent of many other action fantasy properties. I mean, could Universal go out and get a Lord of the Rings, a Game of Thrones, and take that instead and have that as their fantasy property? I mean, that's the thing. The bottom line is there's a lot of competition for Zelda. It's, can be easily replaced by some other property that does a very similar thing. So I don't know. I just don't feel good about it. But don't get me wrong, I think it could make for a very cool land, but I just don't know how popular it's going to be. Now, as far as Nintendo goes, those are probably the only two franchises they have left that, at least in theory, could support their own land. The other properties they have just simply aren't big enough to command that sort of presence. These properties would be relegated to having standalone rides, shows, and restaurants. Now you may be thinking, well, Universal doesn't do standalone rides anymore. That's a thing that they've been getting rid of. Almost every new ride in the last 10 years has pretty much been a part of some cohesive land, usually based on one single property. So are you saying that every other Nintendo property outside of Pokemon and Zelda has no chance in a bucket of stack to come to the parks? Wrong. Think for 1 second, folks. What property, what franchise is home to pretty much every Nintendo property in existence? That's right, it's Super Smash Bros. So what I'm saying here is we could see a Super Smash Bros. Land. I think that's a possibility. This is where games like Kirby and his great, cast of characters and worlds could come to life. A Kirby Air Ride is just simply easy money. We could see a Star Fox attraction, though obviously not a very popular Nintendo franchise. Universal doesn't really have a space property in the parks right now. Maybe Star Fox could be that. Yes, there is E.T., which takes you to space, and there is Men in Black, which brings aliens to Earth, but neither really is this grand space adventure that I feel like Universal is severely lacking in. There's also Metroid, which has, a bit of a cult following behind it, but though it has a really cool world behind it, it's probably a little too scary to put into the parks, though Universal doesn't usually shy away from horror-themed attractions, of course. The problem is that you're going to have Nintendo slapped on top of this thing. There's going to be a lot of people going into it who don't know anything about Metroid, who are going to be like, oh, Nintendo must be a fun family ride, and then their kids get traumatized for life. So, I don't really think Metroid will be making an appearance. Other Nintendo games that I think have a chance to get some sort of attraction in this kind of mishmash land could be Pikmin, could be Animal Crossing, could be F-Zero, even though F-Zero is not popular in the slightest. That could make for a cool ride, though. And how about a newer property? Splatoon could also make for something fun. But consider this, folks. What about instead of any other new Nintendo property, we just get more Mario? I know it's not the most exciting thing to talk about, but it's a possibility that I think we have to actually seriously consider. I mean, of course, one of the big Mario properties that has not been done anything with as far as the existing Super Nintendo worlds go is Mario Party. That's something that could be adapted in some sort of way. And I think one, though, that you really think about, what character has no presence in Super Nintendo World at the moment? It's Wario. And Wario has some great games, particularly the WarioWare games, which could make for some really cool interactive ride experiences, more than you just flicking out your wrists trying to shoot spider webs, which is just so gosh darn fun, that can instead have you doing a series of challenges and mini games that change each time you ride to earn points and beat other people in your carts and set records. I mean, this stuff just writes itself, folks. Another Mario franchise to consider would be Luigi's Mansion. Now, we talked about earlier how Metroid, a little too scary for young kids. Luigi's Mansion could be a good way to get a horror-related ride or attraction into the parks that would still be fun and family-friendly without traumatizing any little kids. So that's Nintendo. That's everything that Universal already has available to them. They can call up Nintendo tomorrow and say, hey, we want to make a land based on this property, and they say, hey, go ahead, man, it's all you. But there are obviously other big, huge video game franchises that Nintendo doesn't have the rights to, that Universal could be interested in adding to their parks. That being said, Universal in recent years has shied away from making new third-party deals, favoring instead their own properties and putting them in the parks. Think about Jimmy Fallon, think about Bourne Stuntacular. These are not particularly super popular franchises, but Universal opted to make attractions out of them simply because they own the rights to them and they don't have to license that deal with somebody else. So keep in mind, if Universal is going to make a deal with somebody else for some sort of video game franchise to bring to the park, chances are Universal has to believe that it's going to be a slam dunk. It's going to be something that could actually really make them a ton of money. It can't just be any off-the-shelf property that might make for a cool ride. Now, a concern of mine that I've had for a while about Universal going out and grabbing other video game franchises has been that in the Nintendo deal, I was worried that, given how Nintendo is so protective of their property, that there would have been a clause in there preventing Universal from bringing in any other video game franchises to their parks. However, with The Last of Us getting a Halloween Horror Nights house at Universal Orlando this year, it seems that that fear of mine has been relieved, because clearly Universal has been given the green light by Nintendo to go ahead and grab other video game franchises if they so please. Meaning, we have a lot more to talk about here. So while we're on the topic of The Last of Us, why don't we talk about Sony? Of course, Universal already has an existing relationship with Sony, not just because the Last of Us house at Halloween Horror Nights this year, but because Men in Black is a Sony property, and they've had that at the park since the early 2000s. So it could be easy for Universal to just go to Sony, say, hey, let's extend this relationship, let's extend this partnership, and let's add some more of your properties to our parks. Now, when it comes to The Last of Us, I think it just stays a Halloween Horror Nights. It'll probably get a number of houses over the years, but it will never get a permanent standing attraction. It's just not a big enough or whimsical enough property to command that sort of permanent presence. One video game to keep an eye on is Uncharted. It did just get a movie in 2022. So if that could take off into its own franchise, get a lot more people familiar with the property, get a lot more fans associated with it, perhaps that's something that could eventually come to the parks. There's also God of War, which has gained a lot of popularity over the last few years, despite being a franchise that's been around for a long time. And when you talk about that kind of mythical fantasy, medieval fantasy property that Universal could be on the lookout for, if Zelda's not it, perhaps something like God of War could take its place. Now let's not forget about Crash Bandicoot. I'm bringing him up not because I think he's going to come to the parks, but because he actually was at the parks. Crash Bandicoot was already at Universal as a walk-around character in the past. So how about that? Many people assume that Nintendo and Mario are the first video game properties to come to the Universal parks, or really any major theme park in general. Not so fast. Crash Bandicoot, first and foremost, but he will not be returning, I'm sorry. That's the end of the line for you, bud. Though I will say, I would be first in line for a Crash Nitro Kart ride. Just saying, Universal. Another third-party company that Universal could consider partnering with is Sega. Sega, of course, used to be Nintendo's number one competitor. Since then, they've fallen into complete obscurity and basically have become Nintendo's best friend, with their most lucrative, most popular IP, Sonic, becoming basically a part of the Mario family, having several games where he stars right alongside him. It feels right then to have Sonic join Mario once again at the Universal parks. I mean, not only does Sonic have 2 successful movies already in the books, but he's got a third on the way, and he's got a property that would translate really well to a theme park ride, with Green Hill Zone being such an iconic land. It would just be so much fun to just rip right through. Potentially a roller coaster to match Sonic's speed. I don't know, just saying. I think that would be pretty cool. Now, the next company I want to talk about is Microsoft. Now, I know in the past, Microsoft used to rent out the Universal Orlando theme parks for a private corporate event. I'm not sure if they still do this today, but at the very least, we know there are people over at Microsoft who like Universal, which kind of gives them an in to make a deal with them. Microsoft has a few properties that Universal could be interested in. Of course, one is the video game of probably the century so far, and that's Minecraft. Of course, Minecraft has proven to have legs and longevity. It still is super popular, if not more popular today than it was even when it first came out. It's got a movie on the way in 2025, and I mean, because it's a creative building game, the possibilities for rides and attractions are endless. But if you were to actually go through with this, you would have to legally make a minecart roller coaster. Listen, I don't make the rules. And like a Mario, like a Pokemon, you would not have to worry about this thing moving merchandise. People would be buying stuff left and right. It would be able to have that kind of premium association with it that could put it on the same level as a Harry Potter. Another game that Universal simply needs to consider is Halo. Again, I've been talking about it earlier in this video. Universal needs a space-related property. Not only because Disney has Star Wars that Universal should look to compete with, but also because space presents a number of possibilities and is one of those areas that humans have an intrinsic curiosity about. So turning that into an attraction or a ride or a land is just a no-brainer. I mean, that's kind of why Epic Universe is themed to what it is, right? But now they actually need some rides and attractions that actually take you there. And Halo actually brings to the table a lot of interesting space-related concepts that could make for some great rides and attractions. My only concern with Halo is that it has kind of fallen off. I mean, it's nowhere near as popular as it used to be. The newest games have come out and then 2 weeks later, nobody plays them. I mean, they really need to get their stuff figured out. I mean, the new show didn't really do anything. I think that we need to see a real revival in the Halo brand if Universal were to actually consider bringing it to the parks. And yeah, that's pretty much it for Microsoft. I mean, they're not really known for their exclusives at the moment. You could make an argument for maybe a Bethesda game, but it just kind of feels like those aren't really mainstream enough to command a theme park presence. But there's one last property I want to mention that I think actually has a serious chance of making an appearance in the parks in some way, shape, or form in the near future. And that is by an independent company. It is Five Nights at Freddy's. Of course, Universal just recently released a movie based on this franchise. So one, the relationship is already there, and two, the property is literally based around animatronics. Animatronics, folks, it literally writes itself. Now that being said, it's a question of how popular Five Nights at Freddy's is. I guess we'll have to see how this movie legs out, how popular it ends up being. Could it get a sequel? I mean, the video games are extremely popular. The original ones were very popular with kids. Now those kids have grown up, and now you got multiple generations who are fans of Five Nights at Freddy's. So it could have a case to get a permanent attraction in the parks, but I think at the very least, we will definitely see it at Halloween Horror Nights in the near future. So there you have it, folks. There's a comprehensive list of more or less every video game franchise that currently exists that could realistically stand a chance to be considered to be added to the Universal parks. Obviously, expect more Nintendo in the near future, but long term, consider a lot of these other third-party properties could be making appearances at the parks. So anyways, let me know what you guys think in the comments. What video games do you guys want to see at Universal, and which ones do you think stand a realistic chance of actually coming there? Love to hear what you have to say, and I'll see you all next time. Peace.